Well, hello everybody. Glad everybody could make it tonight. This is the Salt Lake Azure group. If you're not here for the Salt Lake Azure group, you're in the wrong classroom. You might want to go next door. Tonight we're going to have a really special presentation from Brian Foster. He's our resident Microsoft guru employee guy. He's going to talk about, I don't know, something Azure-y.
Something Azure, yeah.
But before we start that, I just wanted to, I do this all the time, I just wanted to thank STG for sponsoring the group. They bought the food, they provided the room, and they had the air conditioning turned on, so that's awesome. So thanks to them. STG is always looking to hire good people. And if any of you are good people, then talk to Jess back there after me. If you're not good, then don't talk to her because you don't want to be good. But yeah, so Brian and I started this group
5.5 years.
Has it been 5.5 years?
Yeah.
I was a young man then.
I know. I was a baby. I was a wee little man.
5.5 years ago. We took a little break, but we've been started up again. We really appreciate the opportunity to share our love of Azure and Microsoft development products. And just so everybody knows, we're always interested in finding other people who want to present. Sometimes Brian and I, not only do we get tired of presenting all the time, but everybody gets tired of us presenting all the time. So if anybody here is interested in presenting on anything Azure or Microsoft or even general cloud, we'd almost be willing to take present. And if you want to present on 3D printing, something, just so that we don't have to present every month.
I can host Octoprint in a container in the cloud.
In Azure, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're always looking for help and presenters, and so if you have any ideas or thoughts, that would be great. So anyway, everybody give a big Salt Lake welcome to Brian Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say I'm almost a Utah local. I've been in Utah for about 15 years. I've been with Microsoft about 2.5. So it's been an interesting journey. So I'm a cloud solution architect in the app innovation space. So what that really means, the short way, is I'm a computer programmer that programs to like the PaaS offerings in the cloud. My previous employment, we were part of a shift to going on-premise to the cloud back in like 2014, and I drove that just knowing that's where we needed to be. We were in like a development department of like 4 to 6 developers at that time, and we were tired of dealing with the overhead of all the hardware and IIS servers and VMs, so we decided to go to the cloud. We knew that's kind of where it was going, and we wanted to kind of remove the overhead as a developer to be like, hey, I just want to focus on building the products for our company that makes money. And through that process and that journey of understanding Azure and where to go, we were already C# developers, so it made sense to go to Azure. In that learning process, I had multiple interactions with Scott Hanselman, Scott Guthrie, Jason Zander, Rich Campbell over the past. So my interactions with them at these conferences as a wee little company, we were small compared to what they were talking about in the conference. Hey, all of Chevron is now in Azure, and I'm a fraction of that Azure consumer revenue. They sat down with me and I had a 2.5-hour session with Scott Guthrie at a conference just talking about how I would do my PaaS stuff. And this is the guy who was doing it. And from there I was like tattooed Microsoft on my back. I am a fanboy for life. And I followed a lot of their advice. And then that's kind of led me to where I am now. Some fellows actually from our user group reached out to us from Microsoft and asked me to come over. And I was like, well, yeah, of course. So this is kind of where I am now. What my job does, what my position is I work with various customers and companies and sit with their development department, and we talk about how to solution their software into the cloud. Best techniques, certain resources to utilize. One thing about Azure or any cloud is there's not one way of doing something. If you come in a mindset of, hey, I want to do like I did in the 90s, then you're already at a disadvantage. We get a lot of customers who like to do that. It's built off of those concepts, but there's also multiple ways of solving the problem with Azure. So you look at the 150 resources that are out there in the cloud, think of them, 50% of them are do the same thing a different way. So it brings your options down to like 75 type thing. And so we get to sit with customers and we kind of ideate on those things. We whiteboard, we talk about a well-architected framework concept. One of the pillars, it's a 5-pillar process. One of it's reliability. And so we talk about, hey, if we were to go with option A, here's your strengths and your weaknesses. If we go to option B, here's those strengths and weaknesses. And I always take an analogy. Either you want to get punched in the face or in the gut. but you know you're going to get punched, but this way you're prepared for that impact, right? And so you know how to handle those shortcomings. It's never like a silver bullet solution. And so it's fun. You know, I work with customers like MGM. I'm going next month down to the Detroit Tigers, and I'm a big baseball fan, and I'm working with a company that owns the Detroit Tigers and talking about how to bring their stuff in. So you're kind of like, it's kind of fun. So that gives me the option to see a lot of varying implementations. Also a very wide stretch of information and technology and understanding. And so like today we're going to talk about the EventGrid and the backbone of the eventing system in Azure. And I have some of my stuff. But one thing we wanted to kind of kick off too, we usually use a tech tidbit. If you ever listen to .NET Rocks, they always have the Better Know Framework section. And so Troy and I try to mimic that over the years. And it kind of gets hard after a while, especially when you're not day-to-day programming, like, oh, what am I going to bring? Like, what's the next thing on top of my topic I was going to talk about? But I was thinking about it for the last couple of weeks, and I do some side work. I do a lot of woodworking as a hobby. Furniture making, wood turning, you know, working a lathe and stuff. I don't know, any woodworkers in here? One, all right. Do you guys know the brand SawStop? All right, sweet. So one of the big things in woodworking that we use, a big heavy tool, is a table saw, which everyone knows what a table saw is. It's a big old giant flat table with a blade spinning at you as you slide wood through it, right? And your fingers and digits are really close to a blade that really likes to chop everything off. And you see a lot of woodworkers, if you go to like Woodcraft or Rockler here in Taylorsville, and the old woodworkers, they're always missing like a tip of their finger or half their finger because something got caught or some kickback and it just, you know, sucked them in or whatnot. And over the years, they've tried to improve the safety of these saws with like a riving knife behind the blade so the boards don't pinch it and take it. If you watch on Hulu, they have the Power Tools That Made America series. It's something History Channel does. And the original like cutting saw was just a big spinning blade. And they just pulled it down and moved it around. I could only imagine the amount of arms that were going missing. But there's a company called SawStop, and they really wanted to stop this issue. And they took it to technology. They leaned to technology to do it. It's not software, but you know, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering. What they did is they have a cartridge beneath the blade that's spinning, and they electrified the blade. And they have a computer on it that reads the current in that blade. And if there's any change in that current reading, they stop the saw. And what it does is they have a little cartridge that explodes and brings the saw into this aluminum block and sucks it under the table, and then it stops. It shoots off 10 times faster than an airbag. And so when you know, it touches your finger, you can do it with a hot dog, it's like the moisture contact, right? And it changes the grounding of the blade. It instantly stops. And so I kind of wanted to show you guys this clip of it, and they kind of just talk about it here a bit. I don't know if I'll have audio go through all the way through, but you'll see here. So they have this cartridge here that fires and it catches the blade, shoves it into that aluminum. And it's jolting, and they'll have people that'll cut their finger, and it's just like a nick. It's like a paper cut. And it's not a smooth cut. If you ever hooked onto a saw, it's a really actually kind of grabby, rough cut. And when it does happen, it makes you jump a little bit. I've done it a few times. But
Is this the saw where they do the hot dog test?
yes, same saw. So Rockler, they're a Taylor, they just opened a couple months ago, and they're a certified SawStop salesperson, and they do these demos like on the weekend. And it's a very loud, a very violent movement of what happens to this machine as it sucks it in. But YouTube, the SawStop, and you'll see people that actually record themselves on accident, they'll catch their fingertips and it drop on them, and then you realize it's just a little tiny nick. So yeah, it's not Azure, it's not the cloud, but I think the technology is really cool. How they have a circuit that goes through that saw blade, and this little machine and this cartridge reads that circuit. And it happens so fast. I think they said it's like 10,000 revolutions a second for the saw blade. And so to read it that fast and to pull it in that fast, and then let alone building like a support structure to handle all that velocity. That's kind of the tech tidbit I could come up with. I thought would be a little interesting than, you know, something we all talk about. So go buy a $3,500 table saw and get started.
Did you say they just opened
Rockler in Taylorsville, yes, right north of 215 in Redwood.
one of those city stores?
Yeah, they're fantastic. They're a good store. So yeah, they have different variations, and then the cartridge, you replace it. It's like $80, new cartridge, new saw blade. but you still have all your fingers and you can still type and program. So for programmers that are into woodworking, it's a necessary tool.
Does it work with blade when it fires?
Oh yeah, it totally cuts in. This is a big solid chunk of aluminum, and it takes about a quarter of the blade. It curves with the blade, so like the carving knife, it just sucks it in. And they sell their own blades. They say are even more effective, but you could use any. I'm a big Diablo fan, so it's the blades I use. But anyways, it's cool tech. I said YouTube, saw stop. They'll see all the YouTube shorts of people catching the fingers in the hot dogs and stuff. But yeah, with that, so now we'll caveat into Azure here. But I wanted to kind of go through a scenario with you guys, and input is welcome. Input's kind of needed. I wanted to go through a whiteboarding session on a specific solution of a service. And then what we'll do is we'll implement that kind of service in the cloud with some of the pre-made stuff I have. So I'm going to give you guys a scenario, and we'll whiteboard out what would be required to do without the cloud. Okay? We're building a video streaming platform, not like Netflix, but where you can upload a video, and we need to encode that video and be able to encode it to a streaming format so then you can stream it on a mobile device. Okay, so we can upload it from a laptop or we can upload it from your mobile phone. Think of it, it's going to be an app. You take video of yourself, think like Marco Polo, and then you upload that. That's going to be uploaded somewhere. We're going to need to transcode that and then be able to stream it once it's transcoded. So as say I record it, and then Troy, when it's done encoding, Troy can then watch that video. So we kind of share videos back and forth. So very similar to Marco Polo. Now, not getting into the details like, this is how we'd write in code-wise. What are some of the big infrastructural blocks you think we would need to kind of solve that solution? Storage, okay. Killer storage.
Processing to actually do the encoding, which can be pretty intensive.
Okay, but so how would we, what's a way of hosting that processor?
Just servers.
Just server, right? So we have a VM sitting somewhere. We'll just call it the video processor. Yeah, there's a part. Well, we got to have an upload feature, right? So we're going to have some sort of front end point. So we'll just say, hey, we have the mobile device here. But from that, I use iPhone. So there you go. That's an old iPhone. It's got the thick border. That upload device. So what are we going to upload to? Some API. So we're going to have a machine here running an API price on some VM, right? It's going to host IIS. And then that process, once we have that, it's probably going to need to go into some HD storage, which is probably where you started about storage, right? So that VM is going to come here to hold the video files. Okay, and then not only that API to upload, but we probably need some logic there to say, hey, let's store, to actually do this storage. So you could probably put it in that same VM. But then also storage in the sense of a DB storage, right? Customer so-and-so, user so-and-so uploaded video X. Video X has an encoding status of uploaded or new, and it's put into there, right? So then IIS as well comes down into here.
User database and billing information.
Yeah. So DB storage. So how do we now get it from that HD storage up to this video processor to start using? Do we just... Yeah, we could have a hard drive. I mean, that HD storage could be something that's sitting on that VM, right? So we could do that. So let's go ahead and it's going to have the HD storage. And again, we'll just put that on a disk, kind of keep it simple, right? POC. It works on my laptop. So we can erase that. So now this IIS needs to be able to talk to this VM. So again, we're going to have either... They're going to need to be on the same network, right, so they can communicate to each other, or have some open ports or something on the VM. Right now, I'm getting over my skis here in infrastructure and networking, as we're talking about here. I'm going to manage IPs, vomit in my mouth. But then, yeah, so once the video is processed, that's going to go into, another storage queue, all right, so process storage. But what do we do now that the video is encoded? What would be like the next step?
Serve it.
Sir, how would we serve it?
I'm guessing a CDN, but since we're talking about
I mean, we can go CDN. I mean, yeah, because that's going to be my next trick question is, okay, now we got organization, how do we scale this out to a global usage, right? So, but yes, we need to CDN somehow to have access to that storage drive, right, that has all those encoded videos. So some sort of CDN. It's going to be able to access that. Troy?
For some reason on the video, it's not showing, so scoot everything up to the upper left corner straight. You just drag it all in there. That's probably good.
Like that? That's all right. I got my picture in the bottom right somewhere, right? Does that work for everyone still? Horrible. My handwriting's nearly as bad as my nasally voice right now with my sinus cold, so I apologize. So we got the CDN, and then, yeah, the mobile could potentially, just access that CDN directly, or we have some sort of API fronting it, right? That then has access to there. Kind of on the point there. What about notifications and knowing when the video is ready? So we can't stream it until it's encoded. What process do we have in the VM? Or how do we hook it up? I mean, again, I don't have any right answers here. But once that video's done in here, how do we know for the mobile user that it's usable? Say again? Notifications, okay. Would you do that via just kind of a, like Toast? Like what would trigger that notification? No cloud.
Maybe a Windows service or something.
Another service is kind of looking at that process here, actually. Say again?
You're moving towards, an event trigger, right?
Yeah, or like maybe like a RabbitMQ type thing event. Hey, this is done. Maybe from here, we see we have RabbitMQ is kind of the big open source kind of event service bus thing, and then we could have another IIS server that kind of pulls from the RabbitMQ. So then we'll have another IIS website that's pulling that, and then once that's done, we can then go in and say, hey, let's update that storage. That storage is done, and then that API would have a call on the mobile and saying, hey, let me view all my, like I said, random videos that are encoded, and you can hit that, and then you have that status update of those videos. And that's just the high level like whiteboarding logic of like how we're going to work. So now if we're as programmers, I start going, well, thanks, Frank. This is great. I'm talking about the business guy that just has this great idea. But this feels like a pain in the butt to program, or this is going to be a pain in the butt to program. This is going to be a pain in the butt to set up because then I have to have notifications for reliability, right? Once the VM goes down, how do I retry these videos? Question about CDN, how do we go global now? Let alone global, how do I have scale and be able to add more VMs because my service is so popular, everyone's uploading their videos, hello TikTok, and then start processing that without the Chinese integration there. It gets complex, right? And already we're thinking, hey, we want to ideate here, you're a startup, we want to make progress, all of a sudden, how long do you think, ballpark, you feel like that takes? If I was to say, how long do you think that would be able to build? You don't have to be it's ballpark.
How many people?
Right? Now, 9 moms don't make a baby in a month, so that's the analogy I always use with my business people. If we get hire more developers, you're like, sometimes. But just think, it could months, right? It could be a year project depending on the size of the company. And again, I'm not talking scale, I'm not talking reliability, I'm just the process to prove that out.
Just adding an identity and user authentication system.
Oh, we didn't even think about that. Yeah, you have a freaking authorization, Great Wall of China over everything. And as a developer, I gotta be like, hey, IT guys, I need this VM. They're like, okay, well, that'll be a 6-week turnaround. When we get done on our list, it's just on the bottom of that honeydew list, and we have higher priorities. So then we gotta wait the 6 weeks. And from my experience, I've been told that's a fast turnaround, which was just shocking to me because I thought 6 weeks was very slow with some of the customers I work with. So then we got to come back in 6 weeks and go, okay, what the heck was that idea again? Where's that PM? Did they write really good notes? I don't know. We're already within 6 weeks, there's 4 other fires within the business that we're working on. So come back to this.
By that time, you've got half a dozen vulnerabilities you have to patch in all those pieces.
Yeah. Update Tuesday came around and screwed you. Yeah. 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 But it gets complex, right? And I look at this as the plumbing, the complexity of the plumbing. You know, an API to integrate the database, yeah, that's kind of an everyday job. Mobile app is going to have something. I think there's some complexity in the VM side of things. Again, managing hardware and virtual network, or just being on the network is a little like I'm not super expertise in. So the idea of writing a Windows service, though, you're like, okay. And they're needed, but I come from a full stack, C# experience where it's like, okay, that's a little like stuck in the mud there. It's going to take me a while. And then when you get that POC to work, 99% of the time we go to production with that, but should we go to production with that? No. So now we got to go, okay, how do we kind of rewrite and design this for production now that we've been proving the viability of this POC and we're ready to go to production and they wanted it yesterday. It gets convoluted, it gets complex. So a reason why I went to the cloud years ago and started is trying to solve these type of problems and realizing how do I simplify this for the developer mindset. My focus in my career has always been the developers. My previous employment, all our tech, and the majority were developers. And so we had that perception of how to bring velocity, how to bring deployments, and again, how to bring that business value, right? And we had a lot of times where our VM, our IIS server would go down, and we'd get emails from the AE saying, hey, our customer says the site's broken or it's slow. And you're like, well, I don't know what's happening. And we had a third-party vendor, IT vendor, so we'd call them up. Hey, what's going on? I don't know. Let me remote in, check it out. Oh, you guys have topped your RAM, so I restarted your IIS, and I'll come in next Tuesday and we'll add more RAM to the machine. And then the problem it's a cyclic, right? And then you realize, okay, my crap code somewhere has a memory leak that's causing the RAM to constantly be utilized in the machine. But with the cloud, and again, we're with Azure, but this is with AWS as well, this concept, this mindset. So Google, not so much, they're starting to get into it a little more. But that's why we have what we call platform as a service offering of the cloud, where they have taken all the best practices of some of these mechanisms and they package it in a way saying, hey, this works for you. One of those services that I think is very, has a hefty punch that no one talks about is this, on this event-driven design, and I don't have a presentation here to cool slides, so we just run through the docs, is a resource called the EventGrid. And that's kind of what I mentioned when I talk about the Azure Eventing backbone, is how I describe it. All the things you do within the cloud are emitting events behind the scenes. Storage accounts, you create a new blob and you store it in that, there's an event that goes off. You delete that blob, event goes off. Specifically, media services, when you want to do encoding, there are multiple events that go off during that encoding job. So that's my question about like the statuses. We'll talk about, because I have a side project I've been building this out on. And the concept of input bindings and output bindings. You know that with Azure Functions a lot. That's a very common go-to, easy hello world example. You can bind to multiple things in the Azure function, and you can output to other resources through an event. We have the EventGrid has its own schema, but you can also event using a cloud schema event structure. So it's just more open world, right? So if you're going to bring in AWS or if you go to a third-party service, you use, again, the more generically used event structure, you can carry it everywhere. What's cool with this too, that EventGrid, is you can take it, say information, there's media services there, but say from your blob storage, and you can actually then output it to a secure webhook in Timbuktu server, wherever you want to host your internal stuff. It gives you a ton of flexibility. So one thing I like about too is in C#, when I always talk to other programmers in the community, I was always kind of ragged on being the Windows programmer. Because back in the day, we were very closed-minded, right? It was Microsoft's way of writing it. It runs on Microsoft hardware. You need Windows. You need Visual Studio to be on Windows. And we've changed the tune over the last 15 years, where even our DevOps is you build anything and deploy anywhere was the mantra for the whole platform. And it was the same concept with Azure here. Like we interwork with what's the world's best practices, and we implement that. In web development, we always had, any web developers in here? You always had, in your CSS and JavaScript, here's how I'm going to do it. If IE, do this, right? Because it always rendered different. And then they wised up and said, let's use Chromium behind the scenes and it'd be good. But we always called it the browser wars. And always having to deal with that. And it was kind of a tribal knowledge thing to know that was out there. or any article you'd read and have a disclaimer at the bottom. Well, if I ignore the last 4 paragraphs and just say you suck. But yeah, so we can, that plumbing, you think about all those lines we drew, this EventGrid can be in the middle of that and organize that. High throughput, I think it's 100 million messages per subscription per region that it can handle. Well, near real-time communication. I mean, a latency of milliseconds between going, hey, I created an event, and this notifying some sort of workflow you have is within single-digit millisecond latency globally. So if you had a logic app hosted in Germany, now let's not do Germany, they have sovereign rules, let's say UK, and this blob was hosted in the West US locally and you wanted to trigger it, you would have single-digit millisecond latency for this to pick up that event and start processing it. Now, if we're doing something like, hey, we uploaded a new video here, so now let's have this logic app over here that, you know, in the UK that then takes it, you're going to have that latency from that aspect, but you're going to have near world communications of these events triggering out. And you kind of see as you go into the cloud, the architectural mindset changed, right? It's a lot of event-driven architectures now. And you got to think that way. You know, Kafka came out, and Kafka is a fantastic data stream eventing system mechanism. Like, in the time of that information streaming, let's make actionable, you know, executions while that information's streaming. So it's not let's long pull this database and wait for that event there. Oh, look, I got this new event. Let me go do something. It's, you're ready to work, and I go, there it is, and go, right? Synapse in Azure is huge for big data streaming. And you can hook functions within that live stream. So think of like IoT events coming in or geolocation. We have customers that have kind of geofencing around certain structures within their big building. And they have like a personalization app. So as you walk through the room, they'll say, hey, we just realized you came out of room X. We're going to give you a deal for going to get some dinner, because you've been with us forever. Kind of creepy in a sense, but at the same time, to be able to do that and track that, move through in real time, and these are big venues. Think of like big, huge conferences and stuff, and all those people walking around, and they can sit there and go, oh, I'm going to stream all your location data, and Troy walked out of this room, so I'm going to send him that message real quick, because we have a function going off that stream, utilizing eventing. It's kind of nuts.
Do people still have conferences?
From time to time, yeah. This is an actual location down in the hot desert where you can walk around, so shows and restaurants, and to drop names, so NDAs, right? But yeah, so this is all built into Azure. Like, this is a resource you can type in. It's a system topic when you go to create new, and I'll show you an example, and we'll build this out. But what I like about it is these events on all these services. I don't know if everyone can see that. Zoom in a little bit. No, zooming in is not really helping me on the image. That doesn't help either. Thank you, Microsoft. But there's a big one too. Cloud event sources, so third parties. So if you have your hybrid cloud, events coming out of AWS, and you want to consume and do something within resources in Azure, you can do that. From your on-prem, you can do on-prem to EventGrid back down on-prem if you want. I don't know why you would, but talk about taking the scenic route. Things like Azure Communication Services. That's where we have like Microsoft Teams. We do phone, text, events off of that, where we have call centers that are hooked into EventGrid to do AI sentiment analysis on chats with their customers, to say their phone reps, right? When you call customer service, they actually have flags of, hey, either the customer or the support agent is getting kind of edgy here. We need to have people to step in and kind of de-escalate. We do that. This particular company does it all automatically using AI and certain probability metrics off of that. So it's a huge, I give all these examples to just realize different ways you can leverage the support. Now let's kind of go, let's talk about this whiteboarding in the same process, or how I designed it, and in the cloud, how it would change a little bit and simplify. So, and then we'll actually do it, because I have all the code snippets here. So we're going to have our mobile user, like normal. You got to be that top left, right?
Way top.
Like that? There you go. That helps everyone see that, right? So we're gonna have our mobile device. That mobile device needs to upload, so it needs to call some sort of API. So in the real world, when you're in production, you're gonna have an APIM, or an API management gateway, sitting here. And this is kind of like, think of the wall around the castle, right? You can do a lot of safety and protections to the APIM. You're gonna have an endpoint here, an upload endpoint, and that's gonna forward into an Azure function. There's my cool lightning bolt for a function. We'll call it the uploader. Now that uploader, that function, with its input bindings, it's going to be an HTTP function, right? It's going to take that video file. It's going to be C# because C# is cool. Run on Linux, and in that part of that process, we're going to have our. I have Cosmos. And that Cosmos DB, of course, is going to take billing information, user information, video status. So it kind of comes down here and sends some of that information. Then it takes that video stream, memory stream, and turns it and brings it over into a blob storage. Okay, that's great. It's a blob. Now I need to move this down the pipeline a little more. And again, we talked about the big VM of encoding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an event grid on the blob creation. And what that's going to do is that's going to look right here. And it's going to say, hey, if that is there, if there is a new blob, that event, it doesn't say it's there. It gets the event, right? So it comes through this way via event with that new item's location on the blob. Here's the file name. Here's when it was uploaded. Here's the location of the storage it's in. Then that event grid is going to say, hey, let's go to another Azure function because I like to save money and only pay for consumption. And I'm going to have a queuer. I'm probably spelling that wrong, but that queuer is then going to take, or this event grid, what it's going to do is it's going to put it, I messed up. It's going to put it on a queue. So we're going to come over here, and we're going to put it on an encoding queue. There we go. Right, which what I have is in the same as that blob storage. But then that encoding queue is a list of videos that need to be encoded. Then what we're going to do is another event grid topic. And we're going to have it on the, enter a new queue. And what it's going to do is from that event, it's going to go over to the queuer, which is the Azure function. Sorry, I'm not on your left there, Troy. Am I? There you go. We're going to zoom into just right here. See the tree through the forest, which is going to be an Azure function. Now this Azure function, though, is going to be a queue trigger. Right? And so it's going to receive that event from the event grid pertaining information about this queue, and it's going to go grab that queue, which is going to give me the location of that video and know exactly where to go, the asset that's in that blob storage. And then what this sucker is going to do, it's going to call this lovely Azure Media Services. I'm off the screen again, huh? With the location in that, oh, come on. That Azure Media Storage is going to go and grab that video and start encoding it. And now we have our encoder. So this is our big VM with all that video processing. And you only pay for what you use, so it's really cheap. But now, this is an Azure resource. How do we notify Cosmos back here that it's ready to be done? That event itself emits events. Once the coding has an error, coding's finished, coding is whatever. So what I can do, you probably already thought about it and thought about how boring this is I can have an event grid looking and filtering to the specific event that encoding is done, and then say, hey, when it's done, so I'm filtering, I'm going to hand this topic over to another function, who I call the updater, and it's going to have the video, it's going to have the status of the encoding, and then it's going to update that Cosmos DB that's way off the screen because I can only be in the left corner. That makes sense? Kind of that whole circle around Robinson. And the only things that I had to build are these Azure functions. Those are the only things where I'm writing code and actually programming. So let's talk about it a little bit. Let's go in a little bit. Yeah.
So the event grid is some, let's just call it an entity within or an object within your Azure.
Yep, subscription. Yep, it's built in from Microsoft. So if I was to come in, so I'm in a resource group for this project here. You can kind of see here, here's my uploader function, here's the queuer function, here's the updater function. Here's my media services that we do the encoding. So I've already kind of written this out, but what we can do and what you'll see here, we'll go to our storage. So I have let me zoom in a little bit. Working a computer like Troy works, so big. So I have this storage account, what I call the storage video upload. And that contains the queue as well as the blob storage. So the actual file itself and then the queue to pick up what needs to be encoded. So if you come into your storage here, and you're going to see this, what's the great thing about Azure is they're very consistent with their UX, which I love because as you get comfortable with it, you know it's never going to take a left turn. You're going to walk, create a resource and also go, where is everything? You have these events over here on the left. This is new of a couple of years ago. Before you had to kind of tap in and to know that plumbing was there. But in that storage account, I can come in and see the events that are emitted from that resource, as well as subscribe to them. So when I say event subscription, this behind the scenes is already going to start creating an event grid for you with that system topic. So even if you had the storage account, you're like, hey, I just want to do something off it when it's created, you can go to the resource itself and already kind of sets it up. You can talk about its name, name it like normal, not talk about its name. And then it gives you all the events that this storage account will emit for you during things that are happening. So again, that queuer, or I created, when that uploader uploads that video to that storage account, I can say, hey, I actually want an event grid that is going to check on blob created and deleted. And then say, hey, when it's created, go run this function to queue it for me. And so, if I come in, I'll just show you that uploader real quick. That is the updater. So our uploader, this is an Azure function. And this is we don't need to go into the details of like what it's doing, but to give you an idea, it's taking a video file from the memory stream of the request. It's an HTTP endpoint on post. See, dark themes on sharing are horrible, so I apologize. And then from there, I'm grabbing the blob. I have a blob package I wrote, so I grab the storage account I need to use off of some configs. I figure out the file name that was uploaded because it changes how we store it. Some guard classes to verify. Then I come down here. We get the memory stream of the file that's being uploaded. We grab and then we start saving that memory stream up to the blob storage. That's where our event of blob create is going to come from. And then we come through and do it all. And then, if it errors out, I do some airing. Maybe something blew up, go figure it out. And then I return. So this function does nothing but takes the video from the user, puts it in storage. And then I came in. So again, that's just an Azure function hosted. We come into that resource group, you can see we have some event topics here like this coding. And so this encoder looks at that storage and says, hey, when there is a blob in that storage, let's go to the queuer and queue that up for the media service. So when we come over into the queuer code, it's so big I can't read it. Here, you can see here, we're running this off of a specific queue trigger here. So again, it can be any queue as you specify that size, and then what it's going to do is it's going to take that event and that queue information, and what that does is it starts uploading that video to the media service. And I haven't build any of the plumbing here. I'm just looking at like the milestones of that process, right? The way stations for it. And then of course I come in and we grab the blob connector so I can get the file and upload that asset to media services. I've wrapped all these, right? So this is using Azure Media Service SDK, takes that file and initiates the coding and gets that started. And just to show you, we can have an example here. So in here, I can't zoom in, I apologize. This is the Azure Storage Explorer. So if you're ever dealing with cloud storage and you want to know what's going on without logging into the portal, download this tool, you log in with your credentials, and you have access to all your hard drives. And that particular hard drive I use, you can see here is the blob containers, and the queue I use for encoding. So if we come to the blob storage, I think I should have some files in there. Maybe not. There you go. So I have a blob of just unprocessed videos, right? And each item here should be an queued item as it's processing. So there's the actual MOV files. And then that event comes into this queue and sets up this queue here. So, for instance, Postman here, I'm making a call to that uploader function here, and I'm uploading a test video I have on my machine with just, I'm just filling in some of the blah stuff for this demo. But you send that, and I can say, hey, look, this works. But when that queue is sent, that event trigger is happening up here. Eventually, once that subject or that blob is created, all of a sudden we have another queue in there. So it's ready to go. So now you're like, well, I want to be able to go off of that queue. And again, that's where that EventGrid is going to come in and connect. Oops. I'm clicking on everything but what I need. So then the other thing too, so to come around Robinson, is if we go into the media service here. So we talked about updating, right? How do we come full circle? Videos encoding, what we do. We can come into that media service, click that events tab, just show you how it's working here. And what's great with how it's working, and when we talk about these other PaaS offerings, is all these events, you can use your Azure Function, you can use your low-code logic app, your secure webhook if you want. You have all kinds of options, right? Here's, right now on this screen, 6 different ways to process these events. What do you want to do, right? Some people really want to write all their own stuff, so they use a webhook and bring it back. Some people, we've had, I like to call them domain experts that aren't programmers or citizen developers, and they leverage the logic app, right? Because it's kind of a low-code, WYSIWYG way of building the connectors and integrations of it. Nothing wrong, but you can do the same things. And so they give you those options. But again, I want to just create an event and subscribe to it. So I just always go to the event subscription, and it's going to default on this resource, so that media service. Names like everybody. Now you see here, let me scroll up as far as I can go. We have 24 different events that are emitted from this media service here. And so I want to know when encoding is complete. And so you can see here in these encoding jobs, track, discontinuing, encode or disconnect, there's a lot of them. But the big one is like the output's finished or canceled or aired out. That's kind of what I want to handle. If these things happen, what do I do? So I have a function that's hooked to this like job finish. And all that does is takes the event, pulls the customer ID out of it, the video name of it, goes to Cosmos and says, hey, Cosmos, go update the status of this video to encoded instead of uploaded. And then the mobile app, when it's going, hey, give me all videos that are streamable, with status encoded, bring that and deliver that to the user. And then I have my list of movies or videos. And I can click on that video and start watching it, and then you have a streamer. It gets a little more complex. But from there, if I wanted to connect to it, all I'm going to do is say, hey, I want to do, when the output's finished, so actually let's highlight all. Anyways, I'll just keep them all up. Imagine I unclicked all 23 of these, and we had just output finished. So we can say encoding, updating, no spaces. And our system topic name, so I always go EventGrid, system topic, encoding, updater, dating. Okay, so now I know I want that event. Now I can come in here to that endpoint and I can connect to any of those events. So I have a function that I want to use, so I'm going to select function. But again, you're seeing that simplicity of those other resources, because connectors. Come to the Azure function. Then it's going to say, hey, select my endpoint. And this is a very similar UX in Azure here. I can select the subscription, the resource group, what function I want to use. Not the queuer, that's for something different. I can go uploader. I don't think I've deployed, so I don't have the actual function yet. And then I can pick that function to do it. And then it's a man in the middle type thing. The EventGrid just takes it and passes it on. So that queuer code here, I can come in. And I apologize if I'm all over the place. And if you have questions, please, by all means, stop me and we can. I have this updater function, I can call it, hardcore technical naming here. And in that queuer, or updater, it really start off again from another queue trigger, inbound binding for that Azure function of that queue, and configs tells you where to point. Then I go and I get that information of that event. See here, I get the event status, I get Cosmos wrapper for my entity framework like stuff. I get the endpoint, I check the status, and I go, and if the job is finished, that's that event that we saw in media services. let's go through and like you say here, I get my streaming URL from the media service and then I store that all in Azure or in Cosmos up here, update and video. And that's really honestly a wrapper that pretty much calls the container Cosmos that says update streaming URL. So it's just really mimicking what already, just abstracting it a bit.
There's a upgrade to media services.
They're actually retiring it in March of next year.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
thought there might be like more of an Azure pure solution that they would put out.
No, they're actually they call it, what do they call it? Like strategic reprioritization of competition or something like that.
That's too bad. 'Cause
They're all AI. Come on, everything's AI. It's too many letters for them.
Yeah, a lot of people have a lot of homegrown code for encoding, and that's a perfect service.
Yeah, I love it. And again, bootstrap, right? This is like a side project for me. I don't have my wife does not want me to use a credit card for Azure resources, so you pay for what you use. That a streamer endpoint is you pay by the dollar, which I found out the first month, or by the minute, which I found out my first month of using it. Oh shit. Sorry, babe, we can't go out to eat because I just paid $300 for a streamer to do test videos. Yeah, so then I built a function to turn it on and off as I'm working. Right, it's a part of my CI/CD pipeline. Like I kick it off, turns it on where I'm working, and I send a command to close it as I'm done for the day as I commit.
I don't know external pricing, but by the way, if you can use just Azure Tables instead of Cosmos,
Yeah.
at least internally at Microsoft, it costs us a lot to use Cosmos DB.
Yeah.
than
Yep.
Azure Tables. So
And Cosmos is actually drastically cheaper than like SQL.
Okay.
Yeah, Azure SQL is so expensive. So I was Cosmos, but yeah, tables work too.
You use like Azure storage tables?
Mhm.
Yeah, just under in the same sort of tables
Yeah,
there.
I use those to collect.
Yep.
The output from my keys.
Yeah, and that was something that sounded like they were going to get rid of tables, and then they decided to keep it. So
Yeah.
now there's tables and Cosmos DB.
Well, and they do a lot of those pivots. They realize how many. I've learned my experience being there that they make decisions without knowing what their customers really use sometimes. Like they were going to get rid of ADO, Azure DevOps, after they purchased GitHub and kind of combined it all to GitHub. They moved all their engineers from ADO to GitHub, like they switched their name or tags and stuff. And then there's a company, they're our largest ADO, like 75% of our ADO usage is by this one company. And they're like, we're not moving. So like, oh, all right, we'll bring all our GitHub employees back to ADO, and now we're going to bring a GitHub Advanced Security to ADO. Like that's what changed that pivot. Was you had customers just saying, "Screw you, we're not moving. You told us to be here and support it forever." So that's why you have GitHub Advanced Security now in ADO coming in November. But
We still have things on TFS. Like on
yeah. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it's connecting, and it almost feels too simple to present on that. But I try to look at like the latest presentation slides and stuff from the content we had. The last time an EventGrid presentation was really revamped was 2018. So it's not like it's constantly changing. It's not like it has one thing it does really well, and it's that interconnectivity, right? And it's just fast. It's hyper scalable. The reliability is fantastic. If you want multiple endpoints, you just throw a load traffic manager in front of it, and you can traffic between two event grids, meaning to connect and go. So your reliability is really easy. Your high availability is really easy to consume. And honestly, it's as simple as what you're seeing here. This is the way I go about it. You can do it in an SDK. You can interact with the event grid in your code if you want, create the event that way. This is just one of the ways I've worked through it. The other thing you can do too is you can kind of create some filters for the kind of events you're going to see, as well as some retry policies, dead lettering. So you're kind of getting more in that event hubs mindset of handling all these, large volumes of events. And yeah, so you have a lot. It's not talked about much from what I've experienced, but it's super handy to move your loads from step to step. But and it's like I said, it's as easy as going to your event, click events, see what what events that resource can give, and how to emulate off of it. Blob storage, create, and delete is kind of a 101 version of what we show in examples.
Can you develop and test on a local machine so you don't get the $300 surprises?
Yes. Well, that 300 was media services, but yes. There's a way you can do some tunneling with your Azure function. And then you can run, I think I have it in here. No, I don't have it installed. I have a new machine. You can run pretty much the event queuer on your local box, kind of like the Explorer here, and watch it get processed and what's going on. Because that's the hard part too, is this is all in the cloud. So how do you develop locally? So you have to do some tunneling through, and I believe the docs even. Oh, that's just the.
You use dev tunnels to talk about.
Yeah, but they have a whole section in their documentation that talks about testing it locally. And if you actually create, I think if you create a queued Azure function in Visual Studio, there's some boilerplate comments of like how to test locally. Go to this site, grab this, change that, and then you're testing locally, doing that locally. So you can, I could create queues in a local storage account, and then watch that Azure function run. So if you need to debug the function at all. So that's kind of a good part.
So the endpoints that you were showing on the EventGrid topic,
Mm-hmm.
those are the only targets that you can select for your EventGrid.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So if you wanted to do like an alert rule or something like that, where an event triggers an alert,
Mhm.
that would work. But you could set up an Azure function that sends an email, let's say.
Yeah. If you want to do that, or again, Azure Communication Services sent that email out if you want to, or you could use Logic Apps to then execute an alert to then go through that flow of communication depending on how you're set up. Yeah, so you have some flexibility to pivot there and how you want to leverage it. But through either the webhook or even like the event hub, the event topic or service bus topic. If you want to do real-time communication to notify, your support users, you can have, hey, this error happened. EventGrid's going to leave that on the service bus. Do some WebSocket communication. All of a sudden, someone that's just sitting on their browser pops up, hey, this went wrong. Here you go, and throw up that toaster, that notification. So, yes, there's all kinds of ways you could utilize it. And I just don't think it's talked about enough, to be honest. Try.
I have a YouTube question.
Oh, boy.
How would you test the upload E2E application for reliability throughout its development lifecycle?
Test the upload of the video?
The upload E2E application. How would you test it end-to-end for reliability through its development lifecycle?
And that's kind of the hard, complex aspect of kind of like the microservice event-driven architecture. You'd have to almost take each of those endpoints themselves, test to make sure they're right, and then do some end-to-end testing. So maybe it's potentially using leveraging Azure Load Tester to put in 250,000 concurrent connections and endpoints. How does it handle those uploads? Again, which is a consumption-based resource, which is one of those they came out with about a year and a half ago. And when it came out, I was just like, damn, where was this 6 years ago? Yes, no, I love Azure Load. They use JMeter, which is a kind of a common way of doing load testing in the Apache world. So again, instead of making a Microsoft standard, they've decided to do the world standard and implement a service around it. So it's a consumption-based testing resource, which again, PaaS is fantastic for saving the dollar, and you only pay for the compute during the execution of that test. So you can easily create a resource, you say, hey, create Azure Load Tester, name it whatever you want. And you have two options. You can upload a JMeter script, or you can create a manual test, which is literally like an endpoint. Put in the URL. You can test google.com if you want. And then you can say, hey, I want so many virtual users for this time period and how I want you to ramp up. So you can totally control the environment of what your load will look like. So you can mimic, say, your Black Friday scenario. And then after that test is done, you get all this whole dashboard of the results. I think I have it somewhere in here. And you can see if you're meeting your criteria. So again, I think of it developers for the definition of done when, hey, am I ready to take this to QA or is this ready to go to production? That's just another tick on the box you can set and say, hey, these endpoints, we have a standard of being below 100 millisecond latency. And really test and make sure you're there instead of just going, well, it worked on my machine, it works with some load, but now we went to production, it blew up. Because, hey, Entity Framework's holding on to this stuff in the data resource when I have 600 users, and selecting all for a report, it starts choking on itself. Now you can test for those specific scenarios. But that would be the way I would start testing. I mean, that end-to-end, that's a complicated process. And if anything, that testing world has made it that way because they're all inherently work independently. That's the thing. The uploader function is not dependent on the queuer function or vice versa. If the queuer goes down, the uploader is still uploading those videos. It's still adding those messages to the queue. And then when the queuer comes back up, it starts chewing off of that. And that Azure Functions as a service will scale out to 200 instances if necessary to start processing it all. Problem there, then you're like, oh, that's great, it scales. Can the Azure, going downstream, can the Azure Media Service handle that scale out? So that's one thing where we talked about, totally caveat here, so I apologize. We talked about this APIM being that wall around your castle. In this call, I may want to add some rate limiting because I know downstream, this function can handle it, but maybe this guy can't quite handle it yet. Or however handle. So you can have this inbound policy and say, hey, I only want so many calls per person. We do that right now with the OpenAI service to do some rate limiting so you don't hit your capacities. We say build multiple OpenAI resources in a region and then do a round robinson in the API to share those requests amongst those multiple OpenAI services so you don't get your token limits hit. And it's a whole cluster right now trying to figure out what's the best way to reduce load balance because we wanted to release a super popular AI product and no one seemed to think about, well, if everybody wants to use it, how do we handle this load? They're figuring out right now. So they're changing the timing belt while they're driving down the freeway. But this APIM is going to be key to making sure some of that reliability of these calls is, you can handle it downstream.
You can do your auth there too.
Yes, you can do your auth, you can do your jot validations to within your own Azure Active Directory, do a third party. APIM is a whole nother three session discussion for sure.
I'm usually the guy who gets stuck with the weird legacy stuff, and I think
I charge double.
I had a customer ask, "Hey, can I use? I don't know if it was Hub. Can I use the EventGrid to do something as simple as a cron event?" And I thought, well, that's dumb. That's kind of And then he explained to me, well, I have something on-prem. It talks through a tunnel. And it's just a system that I can't ever control, I can't ever do anything with it, but I would like a function to kick off, pull the data out of this particular ISAM database, whatever it was, and then pull it in. And so, I don't have a way to make an event happen on that resource.
Yeah.
So, but I do want to pull it in with a function and not have to change anything on this.
Yeah, you want to keep it like a black box.
Yeah, and so I'm like, well, I think maybe the hub or something probably has a cron type thing or something that could spit off.
The two ways I would say going for that particular scenario would be the function. You can do a cron job function time, or a logic app. The logic apps I like because it's focused on the integration aspect. So if you're connecting like SAP or some third party, you don't have to program that connectivity. I can just go in and say, hey, I want to connect SAP. Here's my credentials or my system assigned identity, and just do your stuff. Yeah. So I would take those two because they're going to be polling that data. And you're going to need some logic with it. But then once they have it, and they want to store that in a database or then you can have the EventGrid say, hey, that data's there. Someone else downstream handle this crap. Yeah, I'm just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, I felt a little flat on trying to say, we can do that.
Yeah, and that's kind of that long polling scenario where I just dread when I think about performance, but sometimes it's the only way. I worked in the financial sector for a long time, corporate foreign exchange for 12 years, and you'll be amazed at how many things just run off an Excel sheet off an FTP directory, and you're like, really? We just transferred like $110 million, and that was in this Excel, like, what? And then the secure file FTP was like innovative, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what world am I working in? So, yeah. And I apologize, I don't have an example of the load tester because that is in my work demo, and this is my personal machine. So, but yeah, you can kind of see here some of the reports. This is instantly off of a specific run. You can get tied into all the metrics and latency. So also you can see a spike here and go, oh, hey, look, our latency skyrocketed when we had X amount of users. Let's figure out that scenario. And you can tie this into your CI/CD. So if you're doing GitHub Actions or your build pipeline, and developer commits a code, say you're at the end of your sprint, I'm ready to go live, and you say, well, we set up certain criteria that are pass and fail. Doesn't pass that criteria, the build will fail. It should be a signal, hey, developer, we need to improve on the process here to figure out what's going on. So you're not kicking that down to QA. QA then tests it for 2 weeks, comes back to you 2 weeks later, goes, you got to rework on it. And you got to be like, what was I doing here? Because I don't know about you guys, but after a week and a half, I'm already moving on to another fire, right? You're like, I don't remember. Yes,
How would you have even known?
that's my crappy code. I see
Yeah.
it, but yeah. But it ties right into CI/CD. So like I said, you're not setting up VMs that host Selenium servers, and you're not having to have some sort of VM scale set so you can scale out multiple users attacking, utilizing your product. You just endpoint testing, right? And so Azure load testing is fantastic, and you pay for what you use. So as you bring in most of these test engines, you'll pay for that for the time it takes to run whatever JUnit script test you have. So dollar saved, right? But yeah, so any questions? I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. I didn't really, especially specifically on EventGrid the whole time, but yeah.
You might not want to answer this, but so far with what you've done, how much has it cost you?
So
In the cloud.
For this particular project, it's a process of a subscription based. So just to give you a little more idea of the business, think like Marco Polo, but a user can upload for $5 a month, one 1-minute video. And then for $30 a month, you're kind of unlimited 1-minute videos. And then you share it. It's kind of like a networking social app or interactive. So Instagram Reels meets Marco Polo type thing. The standard user subscription pays for 3 premium subscriptions in that sense of cost, right? So as I scale more users, the $5 a month pays for 3. They get 15 videos a month, with unlimited streaming. And so it's hard to give a hard number because it depends on the scale there. But as the hardware needs to scale, my price is never going to go over the cost of the hardware, right? It's always going to be double. My cost is always going to be more than my hardware cost or my revenue. So in that sense, yeah, I'm not hosting machines all the time. I'm paying as I go, as users use it, as I scale. To go globally is really easy as well, to redeploy through infrastructure's code, and then you have some traffic managers on it, a little bit of CDN technologies on it too, so it's already at the endpoint to cache that stream.
So where would the cost bottleneck be in terms of services like the
Cost bottleneck for me using this service, honestly, was when you go into the media service here, and that media service has a live streaming, streaming endpoint here, and I pay for this sucker right here. This is where all my cost was coming from. And this is what takes that encoded video and streams it on demand. So if all of you had the app I'm working on and wanted to watch a movie, this guy is the one dishing it out for you all. And then that has a certain scale where I'd have to have a few of them. And you're on like Verizon Premium to Verizon Standard, CD, whatever the hell that means. I know I'm not in production, so I didn't select Premium type thing, but this is where all the cost to me, because this is by minute billing as well. So again, I stop it when I'm not working on it, start it when I am. So that's the most cost. Like the Azure Functions, they're pennies. They're not meant for heavy loads, right? It's chipping away. That's the other thing. The EventGrid topic, you're capped at 1 megabit for the event information, right? You don't want to use it as a huge payload. You want to be like event hubs, for instance, will start locking you down, and people get frustrated with us. It's like, well, why can't you let it be bigger? It's like, but it breaks all the concepts of being fast and nimble when you have these large loads. So let's chunk it a little bit. Oh, I got to rewrite everything. It's like, well, but if you took the event-driven architecture concepts a little more serious, you would design it differently from the beginning. So I think that's a key aspect too, of utilizing that, making sure it's fast, short, stateless. Again, my uploader has no idea what the keyword is. It's just ready to take a video and go put it in blob storage. It's like my excited dog, just like, I'm ready. Yeah, okay, there you go. Where's the next video? That's all it does. It doesn't do much else. It's not making an asynchronous or a synchronous call, waiting on a return from something and making sure the blob, because that's the other thing you would do. Hey, let me store the video in a storage account. I put it in a storage account. Okay, I'm going to wait for the storage account to come back to me and let me know it saved it. And then I'll come back, right? Those type of wait calls, all of a sudden your serverless starts crashing. But you can use the EventGrid and certain services like that to connect in and verify that the upload happened. Or if the upload failed, blob failed creation, right? Because it's going to start. You can have another event hub that says, hey, I'm going to call the break a glass function when the upload fails to then say, hey, user X video 2 didn't upload. You can have that interaction as well. So fast, nimble, just I do my little thing and move on. And then they scale, consumption functions scale to 200 instances at a time. Premium's even more, but then cost goes up. So yeah, for me, it was pennies, honestly. It was super cheap. You get your first 1,000,000 executions of Azure Function free a month. So that's another one when you're testing your POCs or again, you're doing small development work. Make your dev in a separate subscription in production and utilize those 1,000,000 executions. They have a QA subscription so you can utilize the 1,000,000 executions for your QA stuff. That starts saving costs. So everything being in one subscription and mixing your production usages with your non-production usages, you don't get to utilize those because that 1,000,000 executions should be gone like that in production. But in production, you're making money, so you don't care if you have to pay a little more. So there's just some other cost management strategies you can use there. Tagging works, so then you know where the cost is coming from. But to utilize some of those free things, why not get, if you split it QA, dev, and production, you're technically getting 3,000,000 executions free a month instead of just one. So that's the other aspects to think about too when it comes to cost. But yeah, when I build a function, I would hook my debit card up to it because I know it's just going to be pennies. So yeah, it's hard to say a hard line like what that cost would be.
We have really large scale functions that cost dollars a month.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. Prices are so low.
Yeah, there's a podcast, Scott Goo, he was on .NET Rocks years and years ago, I think 2017, and they were talking about Azure Functions with this Black Friday merchant, and 20 billion executions, I think was the number, and the guy's like, I could have paid it out of my debit card. It was like a couple $100 for like 20 billion executions. This was like retail type processing, shopping cart stuff. So where you can use it, use them. I mean, that's why they're big. AWS Lambdas, it's the same concept. You leverage that as much as you can. Now it's not a hammer that fixes, works on everything, but it's definitely the first thing on my list. Does it work? Yep, that's what I'm gonna go with. But then you come in and you turn in like this code here because I started doing that, and then you get a death by 1,000,000 functions because I want to just have that separate execution of that microservice concept, and then your CI/CD gets kind of unbearable. How do you version? So then you eventually reach a point too where an Azure function is not the main host for microservices. Big hardcore what microservices are, which is a whole nother topic because I hate the term microservices because I see microservices bigger than others monolith. So I don't like how we market that terms in development, but yeah, it just varies. Do what's right and works for you at that time. That reliability aspect.
What about costs? You can also set up in the cost management section, that resource, you can set alerts for certain thresholds.
Yep.
If you're more than $10 or $100.
Yeah, you can do cost management. You can do budgets for systems. We won't turn off specific systems. And say, oh, you hit your market. We're just going to turn off your, whatever's running. But we will notify, hey, you're coming up to your X amount budget, just FYI. So that way, management and the CFO loves those type of.
Screw up and have a runaway process. At least it tells you what they want as opposed to at the end of the month.
Yep.
What?
Yep. Well, we've had customers like with the Logic app. It introduced like an infinite loop because it was just failing, and then they came to us with like 30,000,000 executions over the weekend. And it was a big penny for it because it was connecting to like a premium connector third party. And and that's kind of comes to product evolution too, because then we started introducing, I wasn't even part of any of it. Microsoft started introducing threshold alerts for Logic apps. So if it runs, a certain amount of time for so long, you notify somebody, where there's smoke, there's fire type thing.
It's a surprise aspect.
Yeah, and to go blindly in to just say, "Oh, cloud saves me money. I'm not going to worry about it," is honestly foolish. I did it, when I first started. I didn't even worry about it. But you can come in, to see your cost suspicion, and the key with it is tags. You can kind of see the bottom here. This is just kind of like generic stuff here, but I have it kind of broken down resource groups. We have certain locations in resource tags, right? Like what's a production environment? What's for project X? You can break down your costs, like, hey, what was everything used for project X, and what's that cost for us? Did we make money from it? Was it worth it? Tags are huge to utilize in that.
Another thing too is storage is cheap. Storage egress is not necessarily cheap. So
Yeah.
You definitely want your storage to be local to those Azure functions. If they're streaming stuff back and forth to storage and it stays in the same data center, your cost will be pretty low. If you're going across region, even if you're going west US and east US, you pay microservice costs. So it's often cheaper to have storage in West US and East US. It's got duplicate information on it than it is to stream it between the two.
Yep. Yep. As yeah, as easy as that drop down is, selecting Japan West is a lot different than making sure it's in the US West where your stuff's at. And the resource costs are different per regions too, which is kind of interesting. And then you deal with like sovereignty rules, like all your data that's in Germany needs to stay in Germany. And if you're using an app service that's outside of Germany that's accessing the storage account in Germany, you're now breaking SOC compliances. And you'll get alerts of that. But yeah, that's something key. As easy it is to select here and say everything's in the West US 3, which is in Arizona, and I create the West US, which is in Seattle area, if I remember right. There's a cost to that, transferring that data back and forth. Especially even more if you're going off Azure premises to say AWS. We're going to up that rate a bit.
So, and I might have missed what you said, so in that German example, would it actually send you a notification that, hey, you're breaking the law? Okay, because I'm thinking as a developer, like, most of us don't have a strong legal background.
Steve did it. We're firing him.
Oh, just do it this way. All right, you set it up, and you're not in legal compliance. They probably don't think they talk to legal. It's like, oh, the developer is just writing something. Who cares?
Yeah.
You know, he's obeying U.S. laws. Like, hopefully, he's not obeying German laws.
Yeah, no, there's some of that. One thing I loved about again financial sector, being in Azure too, is we had these audits every year, SOC audit, Dodd-Frank audits, federal audits, where Microsoft GDRP audits, that came out in the EU. Microsoft follows all of those, and so a lot of times it was easy to say, we're on Azure, and they're like, oh, okay, well, we're done. You're welcome.
Fire your architect who even allowed developers access to a place where they shouldn't send data.
Well, and I think don't quote me on it, but I think in a specific resource that's like in Germany, certain networking things are by default locked down, so you can't change in the portal, so you can't transfer out. If I remember right, there's some guardrails there near where, but usually too, those that are working in Germany, like with Germany is a big, they just know that, like you're hopefully, like say your legal team or someone, like for us when we talked about GDPR in the finance world, like it was all over, like whether you had legal as a developer or not, just being in that company, it was all talk about that. So you just learned it. But they won't necessarily say, hey, woo, red alert, not in my house, Didn't say the magic word.
But like you used to be one of those, if you didn't know, like, oh, I'll just move to this cloud resource. Like I can only imagine, like, and obviously we should know that you can't move the medical information from one place to another. Like, oh yeah, it's U.S. medical information. I'm going to move it over to China.
Yeah.
And that's going to really piss people off.
They already have it. You don't need to.
Yeah.
Or like Saudi Arabia, they have laws. They don't even allow third-party data, like third parties retain data. So if you want to have an instance in Saudi Arabia, you actually have to do Azure Stack. So they have on data premises there. You rent out their hardware, and then you install Azure on that, and then you can interact with it with the rest of your organization. That's an interesting one. Yeah, we're with AECOM. They're doing Project Neom, and they're building this whole digital city in Saudi Arabia. And to access any of that, they had to rent out on-prem hardware and then install Azure on it.
Is that the city that's all one big long line?
Pretty much, yeah. It's like in every other Mission Impossible movie, they're there. It's the one where he's like walking on the glass.
Yeah, miles and miles.
Yeah.
It's not spread out, just miles long.
Yeah.
The corridor.
So you get in some of those hairballs scenarios. But no, I appreciate it, guys. It's kind of all I know we're 17 over, so appreciate the time. Hopefully you found it insightful. Again, EventGrid, it's so simple to bring in that once you don't realize the power you have for it, you'll start thinking about, can I use this here? If not, okay, what else can I use? Like start thinking about that. Again, plumbing. I think about plumbing and moving the processing down the chain here. How do I notify A to B and B to C? And instead of long polling, I'm going to use the EventGrid and use the Azure backbone. That's the thing. EventGrid is connecting into the Azure resources events. This is not an event from a third-party resourcer. My program, XYZ, emitted an event programmatically. That's where you use Event Hub and then process that into the Azure ecosystem. This is for resources that are in the Azure ecosystem working with each other with those input and output plugins. So they all play nicely together. But thank you for your evening, guys, and stay safe.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, everybody.